I think it's quite difficult thing to define. I think it's very much down to the individual and groups of individuals and societies about how they would define privacy. But I think for me, it's an understanding that I have a right to not share all of the information that is personal to myself with anybody who should ask for it. So it's about having control of my personal information and choosing who I share that with. I think that privacy and freedom of expression certainly can coexist. I think it's about the control over what you're saying and where you're saying it, especially with relation to social media. I think people are getting more and more used to sharing information on a daily basis, and they don't tend to stop and think about what that information means for them in their day-to-day lives, whether employers could potentially see that, or even their governments could potentially see that. And then at the other end of the spectrum, you've got targeted advertising through social media and things like that. So our data is becoming incredibly valuable to both governments and to private companies. And that obviously affects our privacy. But I don't think that has yet had a direct impact on freedom of expression. I think in democratic countries anyway, there's an expectation that, at least with the internet and our day-to-day lives, that you will not be a focus of the government and security services unless you are doing something wrong. So I think for the majority of people, they think that the government would have absolutely no need to look at their emails because at the end of the day, they're not doing anything wrong, they're not a criminal, and they're not a terrorist. But that's becoming less and less of a fact. We know that some governments are now looking at emails as a way of monitoring and surveying what's going on in general society. And so I think that line between I'm not doing anything wrong, so I have nothing to hide, and I'm going to be of no interest to the government is becoming more and more blurred as we put more and more information about ourselves online. So I think people are becoming under the spell somewhat of the internet and social media. It's something that's allowing us to share our thoughts and feelings and share information like we've never seen before in the history of the written word and the history of democracy, certainly. And so I think that people are still getting to grips with social media and the internet and just what information should be put out there, and we're only starting to see the repercussions of that now. I think governments and private companies are only starting to realise the potential and the value of the data that we've been putting online, and so the repercussions of that are only starting to emerge. But I think that the majority of people feel that the benefits outweigh the negatives in terms of the information that they're putting about themselves online. Certainly nothing too terrible has yet happened to anybody, but I think that could potentially change. I think data could one day potentially be used as a weapon in terms of cyber attack and things like that. So I think it's something that's absolutely still emerging, and I think people are right to start to become slightly more concerned about online privacy. I think people have a right to give up or to maintain as much privacy as they may or may not want to have. I think it's all about having control over your personal information and about your identity. So if you're happy with, say, using a mobile phone app which gathers your location data and your address book and uses all that information to, say, give you targeted advertising or benefits in terms of discounts when you walk past certain shops, I think that's absolutely fine as long as that's been a consensual process and you've opted into that. If that's something that really terrifies you and you wouldn't want to share that information, you should equally have the opportunity to not do that. It shouldn't be forced upon you. And unfortunately, with mobile phones and the internet and applications, we're moving further away from privacy by design, and I think that's something that's starting to startle people in terms of the information that can be grabbed without their consent and control. I think data is an incredibly valuable thing, and it can be used for both beneficial and negative consequences depending on who has that data. So it can be benign or as intrusive as an analyst wants it to be. So in terms of human rights violations, it's certainly something that could be used by governments or even multinational companies for their own benefit. And whether that is beneficial or negative to the society as a whole, I think that's yet to be seen. So if you've got nothing to hide, you've got nothing to fear is something that we at Big Brother Watch hear on an almost daily basis, ranging from whether we're talking about CCTV cameras, internet surveillance, freedom of expression, freedom of the press, whatever it is that we talk about to do with civil liberties and privacy issues. And I think the main response to that is you have the right, certainly in a democratic country, to leave your front door without being expected that you've committed a crime or without any form of suspicion. We have something, certainly in the UK, of innocent until proven guilty, and it shouldn't be the other way round. And the more that we use things like CCTV cameras and we monitor the internet and we monitor what people are saying and doing, I think that's when we start moving away from that idea of innocent until proven guilty, and it's something that I think the vast amount of people feel very uncomfortable with. I think depending on where you are in the world, we still do have internet freedom. Obviously, some countries are more free than others, and some countries go out of their way to block content, whereas others are quite happy with letting internet users search for whatever they want. There's a big difference, I think, between looking at illegal content, so child pornography, and content that most people would deem vulgar or unnecessary, so general pornography. And that's a debate that's currently being had in the UK in terms of should we automatically block content. But I think currently we still have freedom of the internet, and it's something that's being heavily debated around the world. And I think we're still yet to see what legislation and regulation is going to be used to govern the internet.